Well, good morning, everyone. If you've been to previous Creation Sundays, I've shown a video, so if you're expecting a video this morning, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm going to do something a little bit different. Last year, before one of my trips to the States, I was told I was supposed to give a report on my trip. So I'll do that today. But some of you might ask, what's the correlation between my road trip to the States and Creation Sunday? Well, the reason for my trip was to visit some Creation museums. So I figured reporting on them today was appropriate. But since it is Sunday morning, I figured I'd better begin with Scripture. Psalms 19, verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. And in Romans 1, verse 20. For from the creation of the world, the invisible things of him are clearly seen, being understood through the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. So the heavens and all of creation show God's glory and even his other attributes. So that's what these museums do. They show the glory of God, the Creator, through the creation. Now, it is best to see these things in person, but I understand that not all of you are as blessed as I am and as free to travel. So maybe I can share a little bit of that with you today. I've been able to visit several museums dedicated to the scriptural interpretation of science and history. There's not many of them, so I had to go a long way to get to just 4. So to make it worthwhile, I did a couple of touristy things along the way. I did Mount Rushmore Zoo and a few caves, which I'll throw in here today as well. So let's begin. My first stop was to the Glendive Dinosaur and Fossil Museum, which is of course in Glendive in eastern Montana. And they state right up front what their purpose is. If you can read the highlighted part there. It says, unlike most other museums, this one is dedicated to the glory of God, the Creator. And down a little further, expect to see some facts and evidence that you may have never seen before. Now, I was familiar with most of it, but if you get a chance, you should go. It's not a very big museum, as museums go. This is about a third of the main floor. The displays are simple, but they do get the point across. This one is of giantism of animals before the flood. And they do have a number of real dinosaur fossil skeletons. That's why they call it the Dinosaur Museum. Most of you should recognize the Triceratops here. And although this is not a commonly known dinosaur, this is one of my favorites. It's called the Ankylosaurus. And they do have a few displays of ancient artwork that indicate that dinosaurs and man may have lived together in the various places on the earth after the flood. Before the word dinosaur was invented, only a couple of hundred years ago, these great beasts like this were actually called dragons in antiquity. This is one of the common themes covered in most of the museums. And I have some books at the back if you want more information about this. Moving on, this is a simple but informative display of the Grand Canyon geology and how the slow process of uniformity cannot explain most of the features of the canyon. But I won't go into the details here today. There is a small room dedicated to the history of the Bible, another theme that pops up in most of the museums. And this was one of the few hands-on and interactive displays for the younger audience to play with. You can see the buttons on the one side there. In the back, there's also a small workshop where you can look in and see what they do for actual fossil digs in the area. This shows a little bit of behind the scenes, as it were, of what needs to happen to fossils to prepare them for this public display. And again, I would recommend it if anyone's in the area of Montana. This is the closest museum to us. So check the website or you can ask me afterwards. Now the next museum I visited was the Answers in Genesis Museum in northern Kentucky. But if you know geography at all, it's quite a long ways from Montana to Kentucky. Kentucky. So along the way, I stopped at a few caves. My first caving experience was here in Wind Cave in South Dakota. It is said to be one of the largest cave systems in the U.S. This is what is known, but they're still exploring. And this section here, this part in yellow, is the tour that I took. It's about 1/3 of a mile long. It's the longest of the tours they offer. Now I will show you a few pictures, but I just realized that in caves there's not much light, so it is dark, so you don't get very many good pictures. But I'll show you just a few here. All the caves have prepared paths to follow, for safety of course. But if you've never been underground before, it really is a whole new experience. There is beauty to be found everywhere in God's creation. Perspective is almost impossible, but I'll try to help you in a few slides later. Moving on to my next cave. This was a smaller, privately owned cave in eastern Minnesota. This one had very tall and narrow passages, but it wasn't as long. They had a few fossils in the walls that the guides pointed out. It really is more impressive in person, believe me. The pictures don't do it justice. I'll spend more time on another cave later on. So I finally got to Kentucky and with the Answers of Genesis Creation Museum. This is, I think, the largest creation-themed museum in the United States, displaying the world with a biblical worldview. Just the lobby area was full of interesting displays, like this mastodon and a flying pterodon. You had to be there to get an idea of how big it really is, how wide. As I mentioned, the common theme, there were a number of signs explaining how the dragon's legends from different cultures around the world could actually be tales of ancient encounters with dinosaurs. And then entering the museum proper, they begin with their conception of the Garden of Eden, complete with background noises of birds and other animals. They of course had a number of dinosaurs displayed, and some of them were robotically animated. You can't see that from pictures, so I took a video. You get the idea. The displays here are world-class quality, including some actual fossils, not just casts, as some museums have. And a section on why literal Genesis is important to the truth and authority of the whole of the Bible. And for the secular crowd, a display on how Christianity, which is based on the truth of the Bible, answers life's biggest and most important questions about life and eternity. Visitors do not leave without being presented with the biblical worldview and the gospel message of forgiveness and salvation. This newer display was just added a couple of years ago. It is a powerful pro-life display showing the complexity of life and how we are human from the very moment of conception. Again, I could have taken a whole bunch of pictures. Here's another video. That gives you an idea. Those models are very detailed and realistic. A lot of work went into those. The museum is not just about dinosaurs, but it has the wonders and beauty of all of God's creation. Here's a display on the insects and the butterflies. And since I had been caving, the display and the beautiful crystals got my attention. There is beauty even in the unseen depths of the earth. And I can't forget to mention the zipline opportunity for the younger or maybe just more adventurous types. And if you're wondering, yes, I did do this. And finally, I'll mention the small petting zoo at the back of the building. There really is a little bit something for everyone. I'll continue moving on. The Ark Encounter, it's also built by Answers in Genesis, just about a half hour away from the museum. This is a life-size replica of the biblical Noah's Ark. To build it, they used an ancient royal cubit of about 20 inches in the reconstruction, which results in a boat of just over 500 feet long. It's hard to get the sense of scale from this picture, so I'll try to give you some perspective here. Just look in this section over here. I'll zoom in a little bit. Again, this part right here. This display right here. This is one of those life-size cutouts of people for taking pictures, of course. So if you look at this section here, the end of the boat, right there, gives you some perspective, I'm hoping. It is very impressive. And it's just a little different than the usual children's story imagery, posters and nurseries and whatnot. I think we should be more careful and realistic when teaching our children these historical accounts from the Bible. They're not just stories. This boat here would not have survived the worldwide cataclysm of the flood described in Scripture. It makes it look just like a fairy tale, doesn't it? But it would have been something more like this. And if you think it's impressive on the outside, wait till we go inside. Answers in Genesis tried to make it as authentic as possible, including 3 levels, like in the Bible, and the main structure of the building is almost all of wood. And built with the construction techniques and methods of ancient shipbuilders. Noah would have had at least this level of technology when he was building it at the time. The interior is a large exhibition on the possible reality of the Ark and how it could have saved Noah's family and thousands of animals through the devastating flood, as well as other areas which I'll touch on. So let's begin our tour. The whole thing is laid out in a logical timeline, starting from the perfect creation in the Garden of Eden, then to the fall and the sin and corruption of the pre-flood world, and to the need to destroy the corrupt world and save only the righteous people and the animals. Many of the displays address and answer questions on how the biblical account could be true, such as a common question, how many animals fit on the ark? Answers in Genesis proposes less than 1,500 animal kinds, and with taking multiple animals of each kind would result in less than 7,000 animals. That is absolutely feasible when you do the calculations and the math, which I won't do here. As long as you take into account other factors, such as the size of animals. I'm sure God didn't send the biggest of the dinosaurs, or even any of the animal types to Noah. Noah would probably have just had juveniles that are younger and smaller and eat less. So instead of all these big ones, he probably just had 2 medium-sized dinosaurs. And Noah didn't have to purposely take on things like insects on board either. They could have survived quite well outside of the ark on the flood debris floating around. And if you think about it, many animal kinds are quite small and could have been housed in cages like this. Pictures, of course, don't really give you the feel of the whole place. So here's another little video just to give you a brief glimpse into the atmosphere of the whole exhibition. As you can see, it's a popular place. It was almost too crowded for my taste, but if you like crowds, please go ahead. And since it's such a big place, there are, of course, places for you to sit down and rest, and they show some information informational videos too. Now, most of one deck were examples of many animal kinds and how they may have been cared for on the ark during the year-long flood. I won't show them all, I'll just show a few of them just to give you an idea. We'll start with one of the dinosaur kinds, the Pachycephalosaurus kind. Here we go. Were you expecting something bigger? Like I said, the juveniles. So they would have been, so big. The giraffe kind. As well, they answered some questions that come up on how the modern examples of animals may have differed from the original created kinds, or the ones they took on the ark. Like, it doesn't look much like a modern giraffe, but it does work out genetic-wise. Other examples, like the hippopotamus. And another dinosaur kind, most of you are familiar with the Tyrannosaurus. And also answering questions like, what did the carnivores eat while on the ark? I won't explain that here now. There's answers to that, of course. You can ask me later if you want. And there were many more, even some of the extinct animals. But we'll move on. Along with the animals, there would have been living areas for Noah and his family, as well as work areas, like a carpenter's shop. And I'm sure, we don't usually think about it, but I'm sure Noah took as much of the pre-flood culture knowledge as he could, maybe in a library like this. Those are scrolls in the background, if you can't see them. It's almost too big to take into one day, but it depends on how ambitious you are and how much you want to learn. There's a lot to learn. There's, of course, a small scientific, as well as the scientific displays. They have a small history of the Bible section. They have a room with explaining the post-flood ice age, and a second section on the dispersion of mankind, as described in the Bible from the Tower of Babel. And for skeptics, there is a section on the truthfulness of the Bible in general, and why we can trust it as a source of absolute truth in every area of life. And there's, of course, even you have an evangelistic section at the end of the suggested route. It is worthwhile for everyone. If you're a skeptic, there's a lot for you to challenge and think about. And if you're a believer, there's a lot to learn and to strengthen your faith and be encouraged. But once you go back outside, around the ark itself, Answers in Genesis is developing what can only be described as a theme park, including the large children's play area and the garden with lots of flowers. If you know on my trips, Mom doesn't come with me, so I take some flowers for her when I get back to show her. But while you're wandering around outside, you're going to probably also visit the zoo. They're still in development, they're making it bigger, but what they have already here is a kangaroo enclosure where you can actually walk through and pet them if you want to. A few bird kinds, such as cranes and ostriches. Llamas, now they're members of the camelid kinds, like full-size camels. And hybrid members of the equine kind. You can breed a zebra with a donkey and get a zonkey. That's a real thing. Trust me. I could talk about the differences between modern species and original kinds, but not today. And I said there's much more to come, so when you guys go down there, if you get a chance, there'll be more than I couldn't touch on here today. But we'll get back to my road trip. Going from northern Kentucky to Texas is a long way, so I made a few stops. Some of you may have heard of Mammoth Cave in southern Kentucky. It claims to be the world's longest cave system with over 400 miles of known passages. I didn't explore them all. They don't let you in there. But they do have several different underground tours. Now I do have to mention this, just stop for a second. In the basement of the visitor center, they had a number of displays explaining how they think the cave was formed over millions of years. But then in the corner, they admit that there is no evidence for millions of years. Down at the bottom here, it says the missing millions. The sign tries to explain the missing millions between the rock layers. It's all based on assumed long ages. I'm sure I've said it before, but I will say it again, that there is no established scientific evidence for the Earth being millions of years old. That's just what the secular scientific community wants people to believe, preached through the education system, entertainment system. Because if the Earth is millions of years old, then the Bible does not have any credibility on the source of authority on anything, scientific or religious, including God. But we can have confidence that it is all true. There, that's my science lesson for the day. That wasn't so bad, was it? The entrance for the tour that I took was just a doorway in the side of the hill in the middle of the woods. So you go through the door, and you go down some stairs, and you keep going down, and you go down some more, and down some more. I lost track of how many steps there were. But finally you come into a small room where the guide starts the actual tour. I tried to take a few pictures, but as I said before, the dim light underground doesn't help the camera at all. But it is a very unique environment. The orange color is just because of the lighting. It's not that color in real life. But being this deep in caves is an experience you cannot really describe. You have to experience it. The rock formations are very beautiful. I don't know if that actually shows up, but then you need to drive across several states like Missouri to get to Texas, where I was headed. So I stopped to see a couple more caves. Merrimack Caverns here is one of the smallest caves, but it is also the most visitor-friendly and easiest cave to walk through. It has been visited for many decades by the public, so the paths are very well developed. I'll just show a couple of pictures here. At the bottom half there is actually water, and it's reflecting the roof. I don't know how well you can see that. Again, the camera doesn't do it justice, but the colors are more true to life in this one. It was better lit than most. And there were a few of the most unique formations in any cave in this one. And for a bit of variety, this cave even had a section where they had colored lights. That's not the natural color of the rock. It added a bit of variety to the whole experience. But moving on, not too far away, was Fantastic Caverns. And this is the only cave system that you don't have to walk through. You get to ride through on a trolley. It's pulled by a jeep. So you get the authentic cave experience, even if you can't walk very well or have mobility issues. I'll show a couple of pictures, but probably by now they're all starting to just look the same. I understand that. You really need to be there in person. So I'll just move on to the last cave I visited, which is Carlsbad Cavern in New Mexico. You may have heard of it. It is the deepest cave system I visited. It is also the only one where I didn't go with a guided tour. This cave system allowed visitors to walk on their own pace on pre-made paths like this. The paths are very well defined, so you couldn't really get lost. Again, I'll show a couple of formations. This cave had a couple of very big rooms, and it's really hard to get a sense of scale, but maybe I can help here. The path here is like 4 to 5 feet wide, and then it goes off into the distance. So here you can see it going off this way. You can see the path on this side. There's a person up here. And this is probably the biggest room that I was in. I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a path here going off into the distance. And this right here is a person taking a picture. So I hope that helps to get some perspective. It was very impressive. But that's enough for the caves. That's it. Moving on to the final and I think the best creation museum I got to, although they don't call it a museum, they call it the ICR Discovery Center for Science and Earth History. ICR, that is the Institute for Creation Research, just built this Discovery Center a few years ago in Dallas, Texas. It's not as big as the Answers in Genesis buildings, but it is very modern and elegant. So I'll just take you on a very quick tour here. Just as you enter the exhibit hall, several portraits of famous scientists like Newton or Boyle, Pasteur, Faraday, and others, they come alive and actually have a conversation amongst themselves on how their discoveries of the natural world display the glory of God. It is a very unique experience. In the next room, you are actually surrounded by videos portraying Creation Week, including stunning images of the heavens above. Now here you can see at the bottom that instead of signs everywhere, ICR has actually placed interactive monitors where people can touch the screens and call up more information if they are interested in different topics. In front of each display, these monitors would display a little information, and then people could touch them and find out more information on the specific topics. This one is about the flood, the earth before the flood. And of course, if you're interested in why God caused the flood, you can call that up. What was the earth like before the flood? And how do we know the actual flood happened? You can touch on those buttons and go to different screens with different information. I think it's quite clever, as everybody is surrounded by signs of lots of words that you're not even interested in. The next room displays what Eden may have looked like, or ICR's concept, complete with dinosaurs. We don't often think of that, do we? Dinosaurs in the Garden of Eden. There's a small but detailed scale model of the Ark. And ICR also reconstructed a small portion of what the Ark may have looked like. Nobody knows. Here again, I could have taken a whole bunch of pictures, but I figured a video would be better. I did speed this up just so it wouldn't take as long. You sort of get an idea. And here's what I said was a common theme in most of these museums. ICR also believes that the ancient dragon legends in history are probably human interaction with dinosaurs after the flood. And in this room there was life-size reproductions of a lot of different animals. So you can just get a scale of a modern bison to the Tyrannosaurus Rex beside it. And with monitors in front for more information for people. And how many of you remember the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980? A few of you. Many people didn't know that the eruption and subsequent geological activity, such as the mud flows and water erosion, actually shows how a lot of the Earth's geological features that many scientists claim to have taken millions of years could actually have been formed very quickly by catastrophic events like the biblical flood. There is really no need for the vast eons of time and slow processes, which many scientists claim today. Okay, that was too scientific a lesson. Sorry about that. No more. And just this, there was a room, specific room off the main path that uses videos to explain the causes and consequences of the Ice Age that followed the flood. And here's a display on the Tower of Babel and the rise of ancient civilizations as mankind spread out over the earth. One thing that was a little different about this ICR Center is its focus on the Bible and Jesus Christ. All these science displays came to a close with the strongest evangelistic message I saw in any Creation Museum. And a display on the life of Christ. This video shows the display portraying events from Jesus' life recorded in the Gospels. See how many you can point out, you can identify. I know the quality isn't great. How many did you see? Every time I watch this, I seem to find a new one that I hadn't seen before. And then this is the last thing people see as they exit the exhibit hall. Of course, from Colossians 1, verses 16 and 17. For by him were all things created, that are in heaven and are in earth, visible and invisible. Whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and for him, and he is before all things, and by him all things consist. And the him, of course, in that verse is Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord. Now, in conclusion, let us go back to my Romans verse at the beginning. Did anybody notice that I left something out? The verse actually reads, "For from the creation of the world, the invisible things of him are clearly seen, being understood through the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." Nobody will see it, nobody will be able to say at the judgment, say to God, "You didn't give me enough evidence of your existence." It's all around us. We just have to look and see. And we as Christians can say with power and confidence that truly the heavens declare the glory of God. So that's all I have for today. I hope it was a blessing in some way. If you have any questions, you can see me at the back. There's some book tables back there. Most of the material is free on that book table. There is a couple of books you can ask me about if you're interested. But thank you.